I often feel like Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate is the best Monster Hunter game, but I'm not sure if that's actually true. So let's take a look at what this game has to offer and see if it really does stand above the modern titans of World and Rise. A lot of what I love about GU is this feeling. It's hard to put into words, but I think I've pinpointed exactly what creates it and why it's partially lacking from World and Rise. So there's a movie called The Mist, and in it, a town gets consumed by, you guessed it, a mist that conceals these otherworldly monsters. The characters barricade themselves in a supermarket, and the movie is all about them figuring out how to survive this whole ordeal. It doesn't sound very scary on the surface, but this movie was utterly terrifying to me as a kid. I think a large part of that is because of the idea of the unknown monster. There's nothing you can show on a screen that'll ever be more horrifying than what a scared and confused mind can create. So as a result, films like this won't reveal their main monster until much later on, if they even show it at all. However, this phenomenon works in the opposite direction as well. The maps of Monster Hunter World are nothing short of breathtaking. I'll never forget when I walked out into the forest for the first time and saw this absolutely monolithic tree that, little did I know, I'd be dueling a Rathalos on top of in just a dozen hours. The ability to see this massive landmark in the distance and actually being able to access it is truly something special, and I think it's this overall design that permeates through the game that's a large reason for World's overwhelming success. Unfortunately though, once you've actually explored these areas, that sense of wonder begins to fade a bit. The world goes from unknown to known, from larger than life to predictable and well understood. In a way, these grand areas almost begin to feel small, despite being inconveniently large. In Generations Ultimate, on the other hand, that feeling never really faded for me. Naturally, a fair bit of this is nostalgia. I won't pretend that doesn't exist here, but I think an even more significant and quantifiable aspect lies in the design of these maps. Let me show you. The Ancestral Steppe is one of my favorite maps in the series. So the base camp is located in a small alcove hidden away inside these ruins. These maroon stones will be important later, so keep them in mind. From this base camp, you really can't see much, and that's okay, you're not supposed to. It's sort of like that moment at the start of World where you're surrounded by dense foliage until you walk out into the forest for the very first time. It's about hiding what's waiting for you without revealing it too early. Here you can see this blinding light shining through between the arches, concealing the rest of the map while almost inviting you out to explore it. This is where the first big difference in map design between modern games and older ones like Generations Ultimate comes in. While in newer games you just walk out into this field with no loading screens, in these older games there are loading screens between areas. This may seem like a disadvantage at first, and sometimes it absolutely is, but it's actually got this unique advantage that modern games physically can't exploit. When you walk out into this starting area, you're confronted with this endless plain to your right and a bit of foliage overshadowed by an enormous mountain just behind it on your left. This mountain is actually accessible by the player. You can make your way through this golden orange forest and actually climb up to find a nest amidst the crags of the mountain. The variance here is astonishing, everything from sheer cliffs to open fields to a dense woodland hiding these massive ruins. Remember those maroon stones from earlier? They're all small parts of these ruins that are dotted across the map. They really add this sense of mystery and wonder to this place that's hard to put into words. The ruined pinnacle, however, takes this same idea and cranks it up to an 11. This is a map that was introduced in Generations Ultimate, and it's the home of everybody's favorite rocket-powered Elder Dragon. In fact, there's actually a cutscene where Valstrax grabs a Ludroth out of the water and takes it up to its nest in the ruined pinnacle. I don't think I need to tell you how high up this thing is, you can literally see it poking out of the clouds. This map rivals the Ancestral Steppe as far as the variety of the locations go, but I think what I really love about it is the theme that runs through nearly every area. This entire map is hundreds, maybe thousands of feet in the air, and in almost every zone, if you get close enough to the edge, you can look down and see clouds below you. As you progress through this map and get higher and higher, you'll eventually reach this one area that's just in a perpetual storm with fierce winds and lightning everywhere. But this isn't where Valstrax is. No, Valstrax is even higher still. You can even see a normal wyvern nest here for monsters like Rathalos and Seregios right next to this massive spire that Valstrax calls home. Almost as if to say this is where normal wyverns live and that is where you're going. So you climb up and finally reach the peak where, despite the lack of storms or even clouds, it's borderline unsettlingly dark, and that's when it clicks. It's darker up here because this is probably the upper atmosphere, and you're on the edge of space. That's where Valstrax lives. That's where you just spent all this time climbing up to. This type of journey isn't physically possible in a game like Rise or World, and I don't know if I'd want it even if it was. It would just take so long to properly convey the distance without some kind of fast travel. And this is what I'm talking about when I say the imagination is stronger than reality. Traversing these maps feels more like an adventure to me, not because I'm able to explore all of the set pieces or landmarks, but because I'm forced to imagine what exists in between. But that's not why we play Monster Hunter, or at least that's not why I play Monster Hunter. These set pieces are wonderful, there's no doubt about that, but what really matters at the end of the day are the monsters and the hunters. This is where things get a bit close for World and Rise versus GU. If I'm being completely honest, I think of the 10 best monsters Capcom has ever made, at least 6 of them are from both World and Rise. These two games host some of the best fights in the series, both in terms of mechanics and spectacle. So how exactly does this 7.5-year-old game's roster compare? Well, there's no better place to start than where the game does, with who I believe is the best starting monster in the entire series, the Great Macau. What is the purpose of a starting monster? If you ask me, I'd say it's to teach the player as much as possible about the game while also providing an engaging experience for veterans. That's pretty much exactly what Great Macau does. This monster teaches us 3 big lessons. First, it teaches us about signature moves. Basically, every monster in the game has a signature move. Before doing these attacks, there will always be some kind of warning. So think Teostra's Nova or Valstrax's Comet. Macau obviously doesn't have anything nearly as strong as these attacks, but it does have a signature move that will cause it to jump around on its tail like a pogo stick before lunging forward at the hunter, almost like the hunter was a subscribe button on a video they liked. This attack is pretty dangerous, and if you're not ready for it, you'll take a fair bit of damage. Of course, the Great Macau will warn you before doing this attack. It won't do it out of the blue, and only when it jumps onto its tail do you have to watch out for it. So in principle, it's actually not all that different from something like the Nova. This is important as it teaches newer players that monsters will have signature moves that'll deal a ton of damage. So if you see the monster doing something that looks a bit strange, like jumping on its tail or flying into the air before striking a pose, you should probably get out of the way. But that's not all. The Great Macau actually mixes things up a bit. It doesn't always go straight into this jump attack. Sometimes it'll do little kicks instead. This is a quick lesson as it shows us that fights in this game aren't going to be as simple as the monster does A, so next it will do B. If the game was like that, it'd be pretty boring. This is something that you have to give a ton of credit to World for, as it totally reinvented the AI of the monsters in game and made their movements just a bit less predictable and robotic, which again is why it's so hard to compete with World and Rise in terms of monster design. But Great Macau does teach us one final lesson, and it's the most important of all. You might notice something when the Great Macau starts jumping on its tail. Maybe you'll deduce this through logic, or maybe you'll just have no sense of self-preservation. Either way, for one reason or another, you might be inclined to attack it while it's balancing. If you were to do that, you'd actually find that you're able to knock it off balance, interrupting the attack and sending the monster tumbling to the ground, leaving it wide open. This is the final lesson that the Great Macau teaches us. Aggression will be rewarded. If you're willing to risk putting yourself in a dangerous position, the game will actually reward you for doing so. This is a trend prevalent through the entire game, and we learn about it as early as the very first monster. And I do mean the entire game. You roll towards Glavenus to dodge its signature spin attack, you attack the glowing parts of Astalos' body to knock it out of its charge state before it can dive bomb, and you even attack the heads of Nakarkos to prevent them from using their elements. The Great Macau teaches us all of this while having the most aura of any starting monster. Did I use that word correctly? I don't know. The point is that the Great Macau not only teaches us incredibly relevant lessons that we'll remember for the rest of the game, but it also showcases some of this game's vibrant and exciting personality, making it, in my humble opinion, the best starting monster in the series. So naturally, next we'll go straight to the end, the final boss of high rank and one of the most unique monsters in the series, Nakarkos. This monster is the polar opposite of the Great Macau. While our gleeful green goofball was the definition of a silly little guy, Nakarkos is literally a creature from the abyss. It makes its home deep in this cave filled with the bones of dead monsters. Even the map is granted the fitting name of Wyvern's End. What makes this monster so unique though is that it almost feels like a more traditional final boss. You know how a lot of older final bosses from games like Mega Man would copy the moves of bosses throughout the game? Well, that's exactly what Nakarkos does. The way it does this is by utilizing the skulls of monsters to draw out their elements and use their attacks. This is pretty chilling, but it's also a wonderful way to close out the game. You spend the entire game fighting and learning all of these monsters and their capabilities. You'll learn that the Lagiacrys can form chains of lightning by stringing together individual bolts, or that Brachydios can create puddles of explosive slime that'll detonate after a certain period of time, or that Uragon has a big chin and is a terrible fight. So when Nakarkos sorts through its collection of bones and pulls out a head that very vaguely resembles Lagiacrys only to then start using those very same moves, you have this this moment where you recognize these attacks, and despite this new environment, you're more than capable of dealing with them. However, it also adds to the darker theme of this fight. Capcom could have made a final boss that was capable of copying other monsters in a plethora of different ways. Maybe it's a monster that uses chemicals to mimic the fire of Rathalos or the lightning of Zinogre. Maybe it could be an especially perceptive monkey that spent time watching other monsters and figuring out how they fight, only to then incorporate some of their moves into its own style. But no, they chose to brilliantly contrast this game's vibrant, colorful, and lighthearted feel with a skeletal creature that copies other monsters by using their corpses to do so. You've been going back and forth with these monsters all game, and now there's this vile creature callously using their remains to fight you. So now, out of respect for these monsters that you've crossed blades with, this one has to be put down. Now, remember how I said 6 of the top 10 monsters are in World and Rise? While that's probably true, of that top 10, I think the number 1 might be a monster exclusive to Generations Ultimate, a monster that has been described as a moving fortress, the single most threatening creature in the story of the game, the Atal Ka. Hey, if you're currently playing Generations Ultimate blind or have any intentions of doing so in the near future, skip to the timestamp on screen. I'm about to spoil what I think is the single coolest reveal in the entire series, and I'd hate to take that away from you. I'll give you a few seconds. Atal Ka is a shockingly diminutive monster at first glance. The way the monster is described in-game, you'd think that it was some Lao Shan Lung or a Zora Magdaros. I mean, its quest is even called Castle on the Run, but when you finally meet it face to face, it's a bug. And not even a large one, it's only a bit bigger than a Celtis or a drone monster. As you fight it, you can see how it might be a threat. It's pretty quick and it takes advantage of this golden silk draped across the battlefield to dig up a massive steel beam that it'll swing at you. This isn't too hard to dodge, and just like the Macau, the attacks are all pretty telegraphed. But after you deal enough damage, it decides that it's had enough. The mantis walks away and then begins firing a bunch of threads into the ground, and then the spectacle here is genuinely second to none. Not only does it totally subvert your expectations, but it does so by summoning this gargantuan mech that was just beneath the sand this entire time. This, however, isn't the sole reason why this fight is so special. Oftentimes, spectacle comes at the cost of mechanics. A fight will look extremely cool, but in doing so, the player will be given less control over their character so that things can proceed just as the developers intended. This isn't a bad thing either. An example of this from another boss in the series is something like Zora Magdaros or Darren Moran, both of which are railroaded fights that create an absolutely brilliant spectacle, but do so at the cost of the more in-depth combat from the rest of the game. Generations Ultimate, on the other hand, takes this stunning reveal and actually creates a solid mechanical fight out of it. For example, there are these enormous AoE attacks, as you'd expect from a monster this big, but they're extremely telegraphed. Check this out. Notice how right after the foot slams on the ground, there's this massive dust cloud? This is actually reminiscent of some of the other monsters like Lagiacrus, who will send chains of lightning on the ground that won't hurt you, but will tell you where the next attack is going to be. This is the same. The clouds of dust effectively serve to tell you where these rock spires are going to pop up. The goal of this part of the fight is to hit these gold parts on the feet and knock down the mech before climbing into it yourself and attacking the nest where Atal Ka is taking refuge. Upon doing so, you'll break it out and return to ground combat again. This time, things are a bit different, and instead of using a steel beam, Atal Ka starts throwing Dragonators at you while wielding one on a string that it'll swing around. So now the monster is using what has traditionally been the hunter's strongest weapon against them. Deal enough damage and you're back to the mech, knock it down, and this time you're in the final phase. This is where Atal Ka pulls out all the stops. It slides across the field using attacks from phase 1, the Dragonator from phase 2, and the wheel from the final phase, tossing them at you and swinging them across the battlefield, all while using this silk to spin Dragonators and launch several of them towards you at once. Atal Ka is simply combining the movesets from phases 1, 2, and 3. Those first 2 phases were effectively preparing you for this final phase. This entire time you were being taught how this final phase was going to go down without the game saying a word. This progression is simply the cherry on top of an already excellent and one-of-a-kind fight. Yet again, despite all of this chaos, the fight still maintains an incredible level of mechanical fidelity. Somehow, none of these attacks feel unfair. No roars with instant follow-ups that are impossible to evade, no AoEs with a range too wide to escape, no nonsense. Just you and the monster giving it your all with the best rendition of Proof of the Hero playing in the background. That's not my opinion, that's a fact. This fight doesn't simply tell a story, it's not just an awe-inspiring spectacle, it's a mechanical masterpiece and quite possibly the single best fight in the entire series. But as exceptional as Atal-Ka is, it's still just one boss. Both the quality and the quantity of high quality are simply too high in World and Rise for me to definitively say that Generations Ultimate has the better roster. There's still one last aspect we've yet to cover though. If you asked me to name the single most important change made in World and Rise that led to their astronomical success, I'd really struggle to come up with just one thing. I mean, the monster AI is a massive change to consider, the seamless maps which reinvented the hunting experience would have to be up there too, and of course the overall presentation that made Monster Hunter both look and feel like a true AAA game has to be taken into account. There are so many aspects at play that I honestly don't think you could boil it all down to just one single thing. However, if I had to name just one single change, I think it would be just how fluid the Hunter feels. There's this rigidity of older games that just doesn't really exist in World and Rise, and that's not a bad thing. The newer games just feel more smooth and comfortable to play. Whenever I get hit in newer games, I rarely feel like it wasn't my fault because of the incredible control I have over my character. I'm amazed that they were able to keep that heavy, deliberate feel of older games while also allowing the hunter and their movements to be so much more effortless. Compare this to something like Generations Ultimate, where a monster can roar, then immediately hit you while you're still stunned, and the change becomes pretty clear. It's a change I thoroughly enjoy, and it makes it pretty hard to adjust when going back to older games. Equally, I have to admit that on the surface, the combat of World and Rise is a pure upgrade to that of older games like Generations. However, that's just on the surface. Everything changes when you take into account what I believe is the single greatest addition Capcom has ever made to any Monster Hunter game: Hunter arts and hunting styles. We'll start with the arts since they're pretty straightforward and easy to explain. Hunter arts are special moves. You charge them up by hitting the monster and they do all sorts of things. Some of them are just one single powerful attack, some are more focused on evasion than anything else, and some are buffs that you can use to increase certain aspects of your weapon. Let me give you an example. My favorite hunter art is called Demon Riot for the Switch Axe. This animation alone is phenomenal, but what the art actually does might be even better. First, it increases the power of your sword attacks, so now the axe is even more useless than before. Second, it constantly drains your sword meter. This might seem bad, but the third thing it does is what makes this art so devastating. While in Demon Riot, nothing you do will make your sword gauge go down outside of the fixed drain that constantly happens. This means that you can drop elemental discharges and swing your sword to your heart's content without worrying about managing the gauge. Energy charge is a lot more simple, but when used in conjunction with Demon Riot is borderline broken. It does exactly what it sounds like. This art instantly charges up your sword gauge by up to 100%. This means that if you play well enough, you can use Demon Riot one time and then use energy charge before it runs out. You can then loop this combo indefinitely so that you have 100% uptime on Demon Riot. Finally, for a more direct and simple art, the Charge Blade's Energy Blade is maybe the single coolest attack in the series. This art uses all of your files to unleash one single powerful attack that looks like this. So those are the hunter arts, and you could pretty easily make an 8-minute video just showcasing them, since every single weapon in the game has 4 unique arts along with a few universal ones. Styles, on the other hand, might be even more important than hunter arts, since they don't just give you 1 or 2 new attacks, but instead totally change how you approach the combat. There are 6 styles in the game: Guild, Striker, Aerial, Adept, Valor, and Alchemy. Each one changes your weapon's base moveset a bit, specializes in a certain type of combat, and allows the use of a different number of hunter arts. Guild style is the default that changes nothing about your weapon and allows for 2 hunter arts. Striker allows for 3 hunter arts and charges them a bit faster than normal. Aerial adds a jump to your roll, allowing you to launch yourself off of monsters and even players for aerial attacks and mounts. Adept style focuses on evasion, granting you a new adept dodge and a guard that allows you to perform special counterattacks. Valor is a high risk, high reward style that gives you a new gauge up here that, once filled, will effectively grant you access to a stronger version of your weapon while severely limiting your options until then. Finally, Alchemy style is a more support heavy style with access to 3 hunter arts and an SP barrel, which grants you some special items like earplugs to resist monsters' roars and team heals. By the way, Aerial, Adept, and Valor all only have access to 1 hunter art, so that's a lot, but you might already see the potential that this system has. Let's go back to the Switch Axe. The biggest weakness of the Switch Axe is defense. It's phenomenal when it comes to dealing damage, but as far as self-preservation goes, studies have shown that the life expectancy of a Switch Axe user is less than half that of a Charge Blade user. It's not sad, we do it to ourselves. This is where styles come in. For a weapon like Switch Axe that's as offense focused as it is, having a style that's inherently focused on defense covers up your biggest weakness. The Adept Evade will get you out of most situations where you would have otherwise gotten hit. This allows you to deal the damage of a Switch Axe user while not having to worry nearly as much about preservation. But of course, it works in the opposite direction as well. Remember the Demon Riot energy charge combo from before? Well, if you use that with Striker style, you may flinch the monster so often that you don't even have to worry about preservation at all. Equally, however, due to the flexibility of Striker style, you could actually just use a combination of absolute evasion and readiness, two skills that send you rocketing off in a direction with plenty of iframes to keep you safe. This turns Striker style into a more defense-focused role despite its inherently offensive nature. You could even take the high-risk, high-reward archetype of Switch Axe to the next level with Valor style and Demon Riot alone. See, when you fill the Valor gauge for Switch Axe, you gain a double elemental burst. This would normally use a ton of your sword gauge, but remember, your gauge only decreases at a fixed rate when Demon Riot is active, so you can just let loose without restraint. Until you can't. You get the idea. All of this is just one weapon though. This level of depth and customization exists in every single weapon in the game. You can play a support heavy sword and shield with Alchemy style, a mounting focused greatsword with Aerial, or Sekiro with an Adept Charge Blade. It takes Monster Hunter's iconic level of customization to a totally different level never seen before or since, even if Rise does get kinda close. If you ever find yourself getting bored with Striker Longsword, you can change your arts. If you feel overwhelmed by a specific monster, you can change your style, and if you just want to try something new, your options are nearly endless. A large part of what makes Monster Hunter as a series so special is that ability to totally reinvent the game at a whim by simply changing to a different weapon. It's a level of depth and customization that's extremely hard to find elsewhere, and yet out of all of these games that are already exceedingly rare, Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate stands alone in a class by itself. So what's the answer? Is Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate better than World and Rise? It's honestly hard to say. I've been thinking about this question a lot over the past few years, and I think what makes it so difficult to come to one conclusive answer is that these games do so much so well. The presentation of World is entirely unmatched, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the game literally looks better than GU does. Equally, Rise might be the first Monster Hunter game I've ever played where there really isn't a bad monster. I mean, granted, I don't love all of them, but there are so many good ones. However, there's just this feeling. Naturally, a fair bit of it is probably nostalgia, but I often feel like Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate is the best Monster Hunter game. And I think, right now, that's my answer. I grouped World and Rise together here, but which one of those should a new player choose first? Well, I made a video about that, check it out.